Therese Langston walked into Cambridge, expecting to observe, but walked out, erased. A world-class equation solved before the timer started, and silence. No applause, no mention. Hours later, his name vanished from every record. What did a centuries-old institution fear in one black teen's brilliance? And why did they try so hard to bury it? Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The cold air in Cambridge had a sharpness that cut deeper than the wind. Therese Langston stood at the gate of the hallowed institution, his breath visible in the December morning light. He wore a dark blazer slightly too large for his lean frame, a second-hand badge from his school barely clinging to his chest pocket. But it wasn't the weather or the ill-fitting uniform that made his heart race. It was the eyes, the dozens of them that followed him as he stepped into the grand lecture hall. It was the annual Visiting Scholars Showcase, an elite academic summit where top students from selected schools across the UK and US were invited to witness lectures from world-renowned professors. Therese, a 17-year-old math prodigy from Baltimore, had earned his spot through a viral TikTok video in which he mentally deconstructed a college-level calculus problem in under 30 seconds. It had impressed some and irritated others. Now he was here in the lion's den. The room buzzed with old money energy. Plaid scarves, loafers, and accents dipped in centuries of entitlement. Therese had been assigned seat 12F, directly in front of the guest lecturer, Professor Elliot Whitmore, a tall man with ice-colored eyes and a reputation for brilliance and brutality. He was known as the guillotine in academic circles, cutting down students with razor-sharp logic and colder dismissals. Whitmore's topic was quantum fractals and the theory of algorithmic illusion, a dense, borderline theatrical exploration of abstract math. Most in the room pretended to understand it. None dared interrupt. Therese listened, analyzing silently, until the professor, with a theatrical sweep of his arm, turned to the whiteboard and scribbled a sprawling, chaotic equation across it. And now, Whitmore said, his voice smug with amusement, "Who among our young minds dares to attempt this? Or shall we simply admit that some knowledge is reserved?" A few chuckles echoed. Therese noticed how none of the laughter came from the other students, only from the professors lined along the back wall. A few students glanced at Therese as if expecting something. Others avoided eye contact entirely. Professor Whitmore's eyes landed on him. "You," he said, pointing. "American. From Baltimore, yes?" Therese nodded slowly, his face blank. "Why don't you give it a try?" Whitmore said, his tone soaked in mock encouragement. "Wanna try?" The room stilled. Therese didn't move. The silence tightened. It wasn't just the question, it was the tone, the phrasing, the slight smirk. It wasn't an invitation. It was bait. He had seen that look before. From teachers who couldn't believe he belonged in honors classes. From airport security who checked his ID twice. From a judge who once asked if his name was real. Therese felt the weight of the room pressing on him. Not in expectation but condescension. Every fiber in his body screamed to stay seated, to not give them the moment they wanted. The spectacle of his failure. But he also remembered his mother's voice from the night before. "You're not there to be liked. You're there to be undeniable." He stood up. The floor creaked under his feet. The lecturer raised an eyebrow, amused. The timer on the screen behind him had already been set for 5 minutes, presumably to let the student flail in confusion, before a dramatic rescue. Therese hadn't even been given chalk. "I don't need the timer," Therese said calmly. A murmur rippled through the room. Whitmore's smirk deepened. "Brave. Let's see what you've got then." Therese walked slowly to the front, took the chalk offered by an assistant, and stared at the equation. His mind was a machine now, tearing through assumptions, patterns, variables. To most it was a meaningless chaos of symbols. To Therese it was an arrogant bluff. The equation wasn't unsolvable. It was bloated. He rewrote the problem cleanly on the side panel, canceling redundancies, isolating constants, simplifying structures. He moved with quiet fury, each mark of chalk a defiance, a rebuttal to centuries of gatekeeping. His fingers trembled, not from fear but from focus. It took him under a minute. "There," he said, stepping back. A second silence fell, but this time it was different. He didn't look at the lecturer. He looked at the audience, scanning for a single face of acknowledgement. But most stared blankly. A few whispered. Whitmore walked to the board. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he began tracing the steps with his finger. "Well," he said slowly, "not quite wrong." Someone coughed. Another professor scribbled something on a notepad. A student near the front leaned forward, visibly confused. Whitmore turned back to the audience. It appears Mr. Langston has unexpectedly arrived at a reductionist interpretation of a larger concept. Not incorrect. Just missing the point. Tyrese's heart dropped. He'd nailed it. He knew it. But now, with a single twisted sentence, the professor had invalidated the work without even denying its accuracy. He'd done what institutions always did when brilliance came from the wrong body. It redefined success so the outsider could never win.
No applause.
No recognition. Just the polite rustling of papers and shifting of eyes. Tyrese returned to his seat. Behind him, he heard someone whisper, "Should have stayed in Baltimore." The lecture resumed. Later, as the group disbanded for lunch, Tyrese sat alone in the courtyard, replaying the moment, the equation, the smirk, the silence. He wanted to scream, to smash something. Instead, he opened his notebook and began writing out what had happened, every symbol, every step, and every word Whitmore had said. He didn't notice the student watching him from the second-floor window. A girl, with a phone. The next morning, the video was online. It started with Whitmore's question, "Wanna try?" Then cut to Tyrese at the board, solving. Then the silence. Tyrese woke up to hundreds of notifications, then thousands. By noon, Tyrese was trending. Journalists began reaching out. Academic Twitter was ablaze with debates. Some claimed the video was edited. Others defended the professor. But most were stunned, not just at Tyrese's mind, but at how obviously he'd been dismissed. Yet amid the virality, Cambridge remained silent. No repost, no statement, no acknowledgement. Later that evening, Tyrese checked the official university page. The post about the lecture series had gone live. There were photos of the event. He wasn't in any of them. As the lecturer smiles smugly, Tyrese's hand shoots up, and the room falls silent. Tyrese stood in the middle of the courtyard, still holding his phone. The video had taken off faster than he expected. It had been meant as a moment of catharsis, a quiet act of documentation. But by now it had become something else. His notifications were still blowing up. Most of the messages were celebratory. Some were patronizing. A few were cruel, yet none of them were from Cambridge. The next lecture was scheduled in the smaller hall. Tyrese entered quietly, slipping into the back row. He had no intention of speaking. He only wanted to observe. But when he passed by the program schedule posted on the wall, something in his chest locked tight. His name wasn't listed anywhere, not in the featured participants, not in the guest acknowledgements, not even under attendees. He'd been erased. After the lecture, he approached one of the assistants. "Excuse me," he said softly, "I'm supposed to be listed as a visiting student." "Tyrese Langston?" The assistant gave him a bland smile. "Sorry, that name doesn't ring a bell." "Are you sure you were registered?" That evening, back in the student dorms where he was temporarily housed, Tyrese scrolled through the university's official social media page. There it was again, the post about the showcase. Dozens of photos, group shots, speeches, smiles, but no picture of him. No mention, nothing. Confused, he checked the press release. The language was vague. "We welcomed an inspiring group of young minds." But when listing names, his was missing again. It wasn't an oversight. It was deliberate. Tyrese sat back, the silence in the room deafening. That night his phone rang. A video call. It was his math teacher back in Baltimore, Mr. Clary. "Kid," he said grinning, "you broke the damn internet." Tyrese smiled weakly. "Thanks, but they're pretending I don't exist here." Clary's face turned serious. "Yeah, I've seen this before. You scared them. That's why they're quiet. Not because you were wrong, but because you were too right." Still, it didn't make it easier. Tyrese had come looking for a moment of inclusion. He left with a target on his back. The day after the video went viral, he walked into the lunch hall, and conversations stopped. Not angrily, just awkwardly, as if his presence disrupted some balance they didn't want to acknowledge. The tension wasn't paranoia. That evening, he received an email from the campus liaison. It read, "Due to recent media attention, we kindly request that you refrain from engaging in further discourse related to yesterday's lecture. This is to protect the academic neutrality of the institution." He read the line 3 times. Academic neutrality. That was the phrase they used to silence him. But the internet didn't stay neutral. In fact, it erupted. Commentators on TikTok and YouTube broke down the equation he solved. They verified his method. Professors from other institutions praised his efficiency. A few even cited his approach as clearer than Whitmore's. Hashtags like Tyrese was right and academic bias began trending. Tyrese watched it all unfold, like a storm he never meant to summon. And yet, as the praise rolled in from outside, the walls around him grew colder. No one from Cambridge acknowledged it publicly. In person, students avoided him. Even those who had been friendly at first now gave him tight, polite nods. The most painful part came when he saw one of the other American attendees being interviewed by a UK publication. The interviewer asked, "Was there anyone in the group who stood out?" The student hesitated, smiled, and said, "We all did our best. It was a collaborative learning experience." Tyrese wasn't even named. He understood then. They weren't gonna give him his moment. Not now. Maybe not ever. His win had violated a script they'd all agreed to, without speaking. A black teen solving a problem wasn't the issue. A black teen solving it better, and doing it effortlessly. Still, something in him wouldn't let it go. He wrote a reflection post and shared it. Calm, respectful, but unflinching. He described what happened in the lecture, and how the silence afterward spoke louder than any words. The post spread like wildfire. It was retweeted by influencers, educators, and civil rights advocates. But even more surprising, he got a message from someone unexpected, a student from Oxford. She wrote, "It happened to me too. Not math, but medicine. Different room. Same silence." Tyrese stared at the message. Then another came in. Then another. He wasn't alone. But that realization only made Cambridge's silence more deafening. Tyrese kept refreshing the university's homepage, hoping, just hoping, for even a nod. But when they finally updated the summary of the event, his worst fear came true. Hours later, Tyrese's name is nowhere in the event summary or press release. Tyrese couldn't sleep. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling in the darkened dorm room, still hoping to hear the chime of an email, a ping of a notification, anything from Cambridge to acknowledge what he'd done. He wasn't looking for praise anymore, just presence, just proof that they had seen him. But the silence from the institution was louder than ever. By morning, the summary of the Visiting Scholar Showcase had been picked up by several academic news blogs, and in each mention, in every paragraph, his name was conspicuously absent. Students who had contributed far less were highlighted. His seatmate, a girl who had asked a single question during a workshop, was labeled a promising example of youth engagement. Tyrese, the only one who'd solved the centerpiece problem of the week, didn't exist on paper. He returned to the main hall, quietly slipping into the back again, hoping maybe someone would say something, acknowledge it off the record at least. But the professor's eyes slid over him like he was furniture. One assistant, someone he'd spoken to earlier in the week, gave him a tight smile and avoided his gaze. In the lounge that afternoon, two lecturers spoke just a few feet from where Tyrese sat. They hadn't noticed him. "The thing is," one said, lowering his voice, "it's dangerous to put that much attention on one student. Especially from outside." The other nodded. "Exactly. Social media eats it up. But academia isn't built for stardom. It sends the wrong message." Tyrese's hands curled into fists in his lap. Outside, he knew exactly what that meant. Later that evening, he finally confronted one of the coordinators. "I just want to understand why I wasn't included in the summary, or the photos, or anything," he said. The woman, in her late 40s, with the crispness of someone trained to stay calm in any conflict, gave him a sympathetic smile. "I completely understand your concern. The summary was written before the lecture series concluded, so it's not personal, just logistics." He stared at her. "But I didn't even get listed as attending." She gave a slight shrug. "There may have been a clerical error during your registration. I'll look into it." "Clerical error?" he repeated, stunned.
Yes, these things happen sometimes, especially when coordinating between continents.
That night, Tyrese sat on the floor of his room, staring at the walls. Clerical error. He'd come across the ocean for this. Solved a problem in front of Cambridge's elite. Gone viral for a once-in-a-generation intellectual moment. And now he was being rewritten out of the event. Not just ignored, deleted. But then something happened that none of them had accounted for. Someone else had been watching. A blurry 10-second screen recording was posted by a student who had attended the event. One who had sat quietly, filmed discreetly, and uploaded it without much fanfare. It was grainy, shaky, But clear enough. The clip showed Professor Whitmore asking, "Wanna try?" and Tyrese standing up. Then it cut to him writing confidently on the board. The original TikTok had only shown the board. This was the moment before it, the smirk, the tone, the challenge. Within an hour, the clip was shared over 20,000 times. The next day, screenshots of the Cambridge event flyer, where Tyrese's name had originally appeared, began circulating online. Someone had taken a picture of the original PDF listing him under featured youth scholars. But the website had since been edited, and his name had vanished. That before and after comparison went viral. People started asking questions. Loudly. Why was he left out? Why was there no statement from Cambridge? Why were the clips being deleted from certain platforms? And most tellingly, why had the university uploaded videos from every other lecture that week, except the one where Tyrese had stood at the front of the room? The answer came not from the institution, but from internal whispers. An anonymous Reddit user claiming to be a student assistant at Cambridge posted a now-deleted comment. "They told us not to post anything from that lecture. Said it would misrepresent the balance of academic rigor. Basically, they're scared it made the professor look weak." Another alleged assistant confirmed via private message, later leaked, "We were told to treat it as a disruption, not a highlight. They said it wasn't part of the official program, that it could be misconstrued in the wrong narrative." The wrong narrative. Therese read that line again and again. What was the wrong narrative? That a black teen could solve what seasoned mathematicians couldn't. That a kid from Baltimore might be smarter than a white British professor at the most prestigious institution on earth. The public started to put it together. Influencers, podcasters, and even journalists picked up the trail. A few demanded transparency. Others urged the university to clarify the incident. Still, Cambridge said nothing. Tyrese, trying to stay ahead of the storm, released a post of his own. He didn't blame. He didn't rant. He simply described what had happened in his own words, shared photos of the original event listing, and thanked those who had reached out in support. His tone was quiet, firm, and devastatingly human. Within hours, the post had over 500,000 likes. But it also drew something darker. Cambridge loyalists began spinning alternate narratives. That the equation had been planted. That the problem wasn't truly difficult. That Tyrese had cheated. Or that the video was selectively edited. A well-known academic with a large following tweeted, "This is why we must be careful not to confuse viral moments with verified scholarship. One equation does not a genius make." Tyrese read it in silence. Then he did something unexpected. He posted the entire chalkboard sequence. The raw footage, unedited. Every line of math, every step of logic. And he explained it in plain language, breaking it down for anyone with a high school education to follow. He wasn't showing off. He was teaching. That's when the tide really turned. Suddenly, people who had no stake in academic politics saw the truth for themselves. It wasn't just a moment of brilliance. It was a masterclass. He hadn't just solved the problem. He had exposed the unnecessary complexity in how it was presented. And he had done it in under 60 seconds. But the institution still refused to acknowledge him. Instead, Cambridge's social media pages quietly turned off comments. Certain faculty locked their Twitter accounts. A few deleted prior tweets that had vaguely referenced youth innovation. And Professor Whitmore. He vanished from public view. Meanwhile, Tyrese's video kept climbing. By the time he woke up the next morning, he rubbed his eyes, checked his phone, and stared in disbelief. The number was real. 1.7 million views. Right above the notification feed, a phrase flashed in bold across the top of the platform. Tyrese was trending worldwide. Tyrese wakes up to 1.7 million views, and the hashtag Tyrese. Tyrese had never seen his phone move this fast. Notifications stacked over each other like a waterfall. Every refresh bringing a new flood of tags, reposts, duets, commentary videos, breakdowns, and debates. For a moment, just a brief, trembling moment, he allowed himself to feel proud, not because of the numbers, but because people were finally seeing what happened in that room. The clip had ripped the curtain off the polished Cambridge facade and exposed the moment he had been dismissed, diminished, and erased. But barely an hour after he processed the excitement, the tone of the conversation began to shift. Praise turned into scrutiny, admiration turned into interrogation, and soon, the entire narrative started mutating into something ugly and familiar. The morning news cycle shifted in a way he did not expect. The first outlets to pick up the story used optimistic headlines. Black American teen stuns Cambridge. Baltimore prodigy solves impossible problem. But by midday the tone grew colder. That sparkle of positivity was replaced with suspicion. Experts question validity of viral Cambridge video. Was the equation real? Possible editing in academic clip? Tyrese sat on the edge of the narrow dorm bed, his chest tightening as he scrolled through comment sections. Anonymous accounts labeled him an attention seeker. Some claimed the problem was too easy. Others insisted he must have seen it in advance. A few suggested he was planted by activists looking to stir racial narratives. By afternoon, the backlash hardened. A British newspaper published an article quoting an anonymous Cambridge insider who claimed the problem he solved was never intended to be solved on stage, and that the teen exploited a moment of misunderstanding to create a viral stunt. Tyrese stared at the words, feeling the color drain out of his face. He remembered the board clearly. The problem was difficult, but solvable. He hadn't exploited anything. He had just done the thing they never expected him to do. In another article, an unnamed professor called the video mathematically dubious, claiming the reduction Tyrese wrote did not reflect rigorous academic standards. Tyrese recognized the phrasing immediately. It sounded exactly like Whitmore, cold, vague, and intentionally undermining, but without a name attached. Tyrese had no one to respond to, no one to challenge. As the international press continued dissecting his moment, Cambridge kept quiet, completely and strategically quiet. Not a single statement, not a single post, not a single acknowledgement that the moment had happened at all. Silence from the institution gave the media space to fill the void, and soon, that void spilled into Tyrese's real life back home. The first call came from his principal, Miss Harrington. It was 6:12 a.m. back in Baltimore, when his phone lit up. Her voice was clipped, rushed. "Tyrese, I'm getting dozens of calls from reporters. They're at the school right now. You need to understand the situation is becoming disruptive." "Disruptive?" he repeated slowly. "I didn't." "We're proud of you," she interrupted. Her tone made it clear she was lying. "But the school has procedures for media engagement. You did not follow them." "I didn't contact the media," Tyrese said. "They found me because the video went viral." "Intent doesn't matter," she replied. "What matters is the impact on the school environment. We'll have to discuss disciplinary action." Tyrese stared at the wall. Disciplinary action for what? For unauthorized media attention. She hung up before he could respond. That same afternoon, a letter appeared in his email inbox. Suspension notice. 3 days. Immediate. It cited disruption to academic operations and failure to coordinate public statements with school administration. Tyrese reread the words until they blurred. For the first time, he felt something shatter quietly inside him. He hadn't broken any rule. He hadn't threatened anyone. He hadn't even bragged. He had simply existed in a moment too big for institutions that preferred him small. The worst part wasn't the suspension. It was the reaction from some of his teachers. His calculus instructor, whom he admired, sent a short message. "This may be a good lesson in humility." Another wrote, "We encourage students to focus on real learning, not online theatrics." A third said, "The truth always rises." Tyrese, whatever it may be, he couldn't believe the tone, the passive-aggressive insinuations, the eagerness to question him rather than support him. But the backlash didn't stop at the school level. It seeped into social media, at a speed he couldn't keep up with. Commentators began analyzing his facial expressions, claiming he looked too confident to be surprised by the problem. A popular podcast host suggested he benefited from performative outrage culture. A well-known mathematician tweeted that true genius doesn't require validation through viral trends, implying that Tyrese's reliance on social media weakened his credibility. Inside the Cambridge dorms, students kept their distance. Some whispered as he passed. Whispers sharp enough to cut. "That's the kid from the video. They say he staged it. Apparently he cheated." Someone said he wasn't even invited, just slipped in. The rumors mutated faster than he could track. He felt eyes on him everywhere he went. Eyes filled with curiosity, suspicion, or dismissal, but never respect. One afternoon, he overheard 2 faculty members discussing him over coffee. "You see the blow-up online?" one said. "Embarrassing. That's why we shouldn't let these showcase programs bring in outsiders without vetting." The other nodded thoughtfully. "The problem isn't the boy. The problem is the narrative that forms around someone like him. Once that door opens, academia loses control of the story. Someone like him." The phrase repeated in Tyrese's head, like a pulse. Someone like him. It was always coded, always vague enough to deny, yet sharp enough to hurt. He suddenly felt small in a place that had already made him feel minimized. But he wasn't powerless. Not yet. When the pressure became unbearable, Tyrese posted a new video. Calm, steady, unapologetic. He sat at a desk, background simple, and walked through the same equation step by step. "This is how I solved it," he explained. No edits, no shortcuts. His voice didn't waver once. He didn't name anyone, didn't accuse, didn't defend. He simply showed the truth. The real truth. The video exploded. Millions watched. Many understood. Some didn't care. But the conversation shifted again. People began demanding an expert review. Mathematicians, real ones with credentials and integrity, reacted to the clip with careful analysis. A professor from MIT wrote, "This young man's reduction method is valid and elegant." A mathematician from Stanford added, "Anyone calling this easy is lying or incompetent." A well-known black academic posted, "This boy solved the problem cleanly. The real issue is why they tried to bury his name." But with every wave of support came a counterwave of hostility. Conspiracy theorists claimed these professors were paid or politically motivated. Some insisted the problem wasn't the same one Whitmore had written. A few argued the video still didn't prove whether Tyrese had solved it in the moment. They demanded full footage from Cambridge, a demand the university silently refused. In the middle of this digital storm, Tyrese's school in Baltimore doubled down. A second letter arrived, this time harsher. Continued media attention has escalated. Suspension remains in effect. Additional consequences may be considered. The faculty removed him from the math team, pending review. Several classmates unfollowed him. Some sent anonymous messages like, "Stop making the school look bad." Another wrote, "If you were really that smart, they would have celebrated you." Tyrese read each message with a numbness that frightened him. It wasn't the cruelty that hurt, it was the familiarity of it. This was how systems protected themselves. By turning the individual into a problem, a disruption, an inconvenience. And once labeled, every door began to close. But just as the darkness felt absolute, something unexpected happened. He received an email, a short one, from an address he didn't recognize. Subject: opportunity. Body: "We'd like to give you a platform to demonstrate your abilities. Live. No editing. No accusations. No agenda. Just truth. The Horizon Institute for Scientific Advancement." Tyrese sat upright, heart pounding. He read the lines again. The Horizon Institute, one of the most respected independent think tanks in the United States, known for televised problem-solving exhibitions, innovation challenges, and academic transparency. They weren't a school. They weren't a government agency. They weren't tied to Cambridge. They were known for championing raw talent. They wanted him. They wanted to put him on a stage, not to tear him down, not to question him, not to erase him, but to let him prove himself in real time, in front of the world. He exhaled shakily. This could be his chance to reclaim everything they tried to steal, or it could destroy him. A prestigious American think tank offers him a chance to prove himself, live. Tyrese stood at the window of his hotel room, overlooking the city that never paused, New York. The skyline hummed with the rhythm of ambition, chaos and reinvention. Somewhere in that mess of lights and noise, his life was about to tilt again. The invitation from the Horizon Institute wasn't just an opportunity, it was a stage, a battleground, a rescue mission for his name. When he'd first agreed to participate in the live intellectual challenge, he thought it would be a straightforward public math exhibition. He hadn't known it would be televised nationally, streamed globally, or framed as an academic cage match. 5 elite university students from Ivy League institutions, Yale, Harvard, Princeton, MIT, and Stanford, versus one team from Baltimore. One viral controversy, one outsider. They called it the Equation Arena, a sleek, high-budget set built like a hybrid of a tech conference and a boxing ring. A digital scoreboard hung above 6 identical transparent desks. The competitors would face rapid-fire math challenges with increasing complexity, projected in real time to the audience and judges. It was part performance, part evaluation. The winner would receive a full-ride scholarship to any partner university, and an automatic internship with a tech firm of their choosing. But more than the prize, this was about narrative. When Tyrese entered the backstage prep area, all eyes turned. The 5 other contestants clad in crisp collegiate gear, armed with elite resumes and posture baked in private tutoring, offered him tight smiles. One of them, a tall guy from Stanford named Cooper Vance, gave him a pat on the back. "Nice to meet you, man," he said. "Big moment for all of us." Tyrese nodded, but said nothing. He saw through it, the rehearsed casualness, the social grace meant to cover quiet condescension. None of them believed he belonged there. They had read the articles, watched the backlash, maybe even shared in the doubt, and now he was the anomaly in their world of certainty. Backstage, a producer approached him. "Just to be clear, this isn't a redemption arc," she said with a clipped smile. "We don't script outcomes, but we do trust the math will speak for itself." Tyrese met her eyes. "I don't need a script." The challenge began under white-hot lights. The host introduced each competitor with a polished video reel. Trophies, internships, lineage. When they got to Tyrese, they showed the Cambridge clip. The wanna-try moment. Then a freeze frame of him at the board. And nothing else. The audience clapped politely. Not too loud. Not too soft.
Then the rules dropped. 6 rounds.
Each question projected for all to see. Time limit 90 seconds per problem. Scoring based on accuracy, speed, and method clarity. Judges: 2 professors, 1 AI system trained in symbolic logic, and a former MIT Olympiad coach. Round 1 began. The question appeared on all 6 screens. Tyrese's fingers moved before the others even blinked. He finished in 38 seconds. Cooper from Stanford finished next, then Maya from Yale. The others scrambled. The scoreboard lit up. Tyrese first place. The audience murmured. A few clapped. The host smiled. Round 2 dropped. Again, Tyrese finished first. He didn't just solve the problem. He found an alternate proof pathway that the AI flagged as optimal variance. Now the audience was paying attention. Round 3 came. Tyrese's question looked different. It was longer, denser. He noticed it immediately. The others had geometry-based challenges, shapes, angles, predictable paths. His was number theory. Complex, recursive, with layered functions. He blinked. Was this a mistake? He looked up. None of the others seemed fazed. They didn't notice the disparity. He solved it anyway. Took him a full 87 seconds. But he got it. Barely beat the clock. The scoreboard updated. He was still in first. But something felt wrong. Round 4. Again, his question was more difficult. Now the pattern was clear. While the others received manageable standard questions, his were layered with traps, ambiguity, obscure notation. Even the AI paused slightly before validating his response. He looked over at the judges' table. One of the professors avoided his gaze. The host announced, "Fascinating variance in challenge selection, folks. Some real high-difficulty curveballs out there today." It was coded language. They were testing him harder. Tyrese didn't flinch. Round 5. His question involved symbolic logic nested within calculus, something usually reserved for graduate-level exams. The prompt included a reference to a lesser-known mathematical principle, developed by a Russian scholar decades ago. He felt it. This wasn't just bias. This was sabotage. Someone didn't want him to win. Someone wanted to prove the point that had simmered since Cambridge, that his intelligence was circumstantial, accidental, that when thrown into the fire with real minds, he would But Tyrese didn't fold. He leaned forward. He dissected the problem mentally, even as sweat rolled down the back of his neck. He ignored the seconds ticking, the audience staring, the subtle gasps as others finished. And then clarity. He wrote, line by line. Methodical. Calm. When he pressed submit, he had 6 seconds left. Then, a glitch. The AI flagged his answer as under review. A red dot blinked on his screen. Gasps rippled through the room. The scoreboard froze. The host's voice cut in. "We're experiencing a temporary delay in scoring." Tyrese kept his eyes on the screen. He knew what was happening. They were deciding how to handle his success. Again. Backstage, a tech whispered to a producer. The judge from MIT leaned toward the other panelists. The audience watched, confused but quiet. Finally, the scoreboard returned. Tyrese first place. Again. The room exhaled. The host laughed nervously. "Well, that was unexpected. Seems our wildcard has a real shot." The use of wildcard stung, but Tyrese let it pass. He had 1 round left. He didn't look at the others. Didn't check their faces. He knew where he stood. This wasn't about them anymore. This was about truth. The timer reset for round 6. But before the final question appeared, something strange happened. The host's earpiece buzzed. He paused. A new screen lit up. Live audience vote enabled. Therese frowned. This wasn't in the rules. The host smiled. And for our final round, we're letting the viewers at home weigh in. They'll vote on who they believe should be declared the most promising mind in the room, based on performance, innovation, and clarity. Therese's gut dropped. A popularity contest? After all that, he could outperform them all. And still lose? The host chuckled. Let's see whose genius resonates. The final question appeared, and it was brutal. A complex systems theory problem disguised as a basic optimization equation. A trap. For the others it was solvable. For him it was one more minefield. Therese looked at it and did something none of the others expected. He smiled. Then he solved it. Line by line. Clean. Direct. Elegant. His screen turned green before any of the others. And this time, the scoreboard updated instantly. Therese, first place. Despite this, Therese begins solving them faster than all five. Therese stayed seated as the studio lights dimmed for the break. Applause dissolving into a low chatter that buzzed around him like static. He could still feel the adrenaline from the final round pulsing under his skin. Yet a heavier weight pressed against his chest, a feeling that something about this event was shifting beneath his feet. He had solved every question faster than the elite university competitors. Even though his problems were clearly harder, anyone with eyes could see the discrepancy. And still, the energy in the room felt tense. Off, as if the staff, the judges, even the audience were holding their breath and pretending they weren't. A production assistant approached him with a bottle of water, her smile stiff and over-polished, the kind of smile that came from training rather than sincerity. Therese accepted it, though his thoughts were already drifting toward the judges' table, where two panelists leaned toward each other, whispering urgently. The AI evaluators pulsed rhythmically, almost nervously, as if it too sensed the tension. Then, unexpectedly, a voice carried from backstage. It was low at first, muffled, but Therese heard it. He wasn't meant to. Look, man, the voice said, irritated and sharp. I told you the harder set was only supposed to shake him a little, not make it obvious. Therese froze, every muscle locking. He recognized the voice instantly. Jason Lyle, the event host. Smooth, charismatic, the face of the show. Another voice answered, equally tense. Obvious? Jason, the kid is destroying them. You upped the difficulty, and he still finished first. Therese stared straight ahead, his breath stuck somewhere between disbelief and a pain he knew too well. His heart thudded once, hard, like a warning shot from inside his chest. The realization sank into him as steady and cold as water. This wasn't incompetence. It wasn't coincidence. It was intention. The sabotage had been deliberate. The moment he understood, a frantic whisper cut through the air. Jason, your mic is still live. A burst of crackling feedback shot through the studio speakers. Audience members turned their heads. Someone gasped. Then the unmistakable fragment of Jason's sentence echoed across the sound system, needed to humble him before technicians scrambled frantically and the audio cut out. 8 seconds. That's all it took. 8 seconds for the truth to slip through the cracks, for the mask to drop. Within moments, chaos erupted in the live stream chat. Comments exploded in rapid-fire lines. What did he just say? Why humble him specifically? So they admitted it? Is this racist or am I crazy? The audience in the studio murmured in confusion, looking at each other, trying to understand what they'd just heard. Staff members swarmed the stage, ordering cameras off, papers flying in the scramble. Producers surrounded Jason, guiding him off stage as he whispered aggressively. It wasn't supposed to broadcast. It wasn't supposed to go live. But the world had already heard enough. Clips of the leaked audio hit social media within minutes. People slowed the recording, boosted the volume, added captions. Commentators dissected each word. Activists called it a live demonstration of academic racism. Even comedians reshared the audio with stunned disbelief. What started as a contest was now a firestorm, and Therese stood in the center of it, unwilling and yet unavoidable. Backstage, a PR representative approached Therese with a nervous smile stretched too thin. Therese, listen, we want to assure you this was an isolated incident. Jason doesn't reflect our values at the Horizon Institute. Therese met her gaze calmly. You gave me harder questions. She blinked rapidly. Well, the algorithm. Don't lie, he cut in, his voice low, steady. You know exactly what you did. Her expression flickered. Guilt, panic, fear before hardening back into corporate neutrality. We're preparing a statement, she said. Everything is very complicated right now. Not to me, Tyrese replied. You didn't want me to win. Meanwhile, the internet was unraveling the truth in ways the Institute could not control. A whistleblower leaked a screenshot of the question distribution panel. 5 contestants labeled Standard Difficulty. 1 labeled Advanced Variation Testing. Overlight enabled. Only 1. Tyrese. The evidence spread instantly. Cambridge's old footage resurfaced too, placed side by side with Jason's comments, forming a pattern too clear to deny. But institutions always protected themselves first. Horizon blamed the tech team. The tech team blamed the host. The host blamed a malfunction. Cambridge hurried to distance itself entirely, releasing a one-line statement. The Horizon event is external to Cambridge University and does not involve our institution. They pretended they had no stake in it, no history with Tyrese, no involvement in shaping the narrative that had pushed him into the national spotlight. The more they denied, the more they revealed. Tyrese sat in his dressing room, exhausted beyond anything physical. Every breath felt weighted, every thought heavy. All he wanted was clarity, just a moment, to process what was unfolding, what this meant for him. But the world wasn't giving him space. It was closing in faster. A knock on the door shattered the brief silence. A man in a suit stood there, holding a sealed envelope. For you, he said simply. No expression, no apology. Tyrese opened it, with trembling fingers. Inside was a sharply worded legal letter. Cease and desist. You are hereby instructed to refrain from using the Cambridge University name, likeness or association in public statements, media appearances, interviews, or digital content of any form. No explanation, no reasoning, just a command to silence him further. He stared at the notice, the edges of the page blurring for a moment. After everything, the erasure, the bias, the sabotage, they were still trying to take his voice. It struck him then, heavy and cold. The institutions weren't just scared of his intelligence. They were scared of his visibility, of the truth he exposed, of the idea that a black teen could not only match their rigor but exceed it, and do so without their permission. The envelope slipped slightly in his grip, but he didn't let it fall. He looked up slowly, the exhaustion in his face replaced by something sharper, steadier, more dangerous to the people trying to contain him. They wanted him quiet, but they had just ignited the loudest version of him yet. Tyrese receives a cease and desist to stop using the Cambridge name. The letter sat on Tyrese's lap like a final insult. The Cambridge crest at the top, the legal language buried in cold precision, and the demand, clear and unmistakable, stop using their name. It wasn't a request. It was a silencing tactic dressed in velvet. He read it again and again. They were trying to erase, not only his presence from their history, but also his very right to speak about what happened. It was absurd, and yet exactly on brand for institutions built to protect themselves at any cost. That same afternoon, Cambridge released a public statement to the media, polished, chillingly vague. Mr. Tyrese Langston was not officially registered as a participant in the Visiting Scholars Showcase. Any footage circulating is not part of our documented program. We are proud of our ongoing diversity initiatives and do not condone the misrepresentation of our institution's practices. They ended the statement with a signature flourish of condescension. We encourage meaningful academic engagement through verified channels. It was a masterclass in erasure. They hadn't just denied wrongdoing, they denied his existence. No name, no apology, no acknowledgement. Just bureaucracy, wrapped in deniability. Tyrese stared at the screen, his chest hollow. They were playing a different game now. A psychological one. One where the crime was not just what they did, but how calmly they pretended it never happened. Almost immediately, the ripple effect began. News outlets that had once praised him suddenly pulled back, unsure whether he had ever officially been part of the Cambridge program. Headlines softened. Controversial teen math prodigy linked to Cambridge event without official records. Podcasts began hedging their language. It's possible he was there unofficially. Commenters chimed in with venom. If he wasn't even registered, what's he crying about? Sounds like another clout chaser trying to make everything about race. Why would a school like Cambridge need to humble a kid from Baltimore? Then came the most jarring revision of all. Professor Elliot Whitmore, who had stood in that room, smirking, daring Tyrese to give it a try, released a statement through the university. It read, "While I do recall an enthusiastic group of visiting students, I do not recall using the phrase in question. Any perceived slight was unintended, and I reject the characterization that my behavior was discriminatory in nature. Academic challenges are not personal. Teresa's hands shook as he read the quote. The man was lying. Brazenly. On record. In the face of witnesses, recordings, leaked footage. But now, with the institution behind him, he didn't have to tell the truth. He only had to say enough to make Tyrese look unreliable. And it worked. Quickly. Terrifyingly well. Tyrese tried to fight back. He posted the original clip again. Added the context. Included screen grabs. Emails. Program listings. From earlier versions of the Cambridge event page. That still bore his name. But the narrative had already been contaminated. People wanted certainty. And Cambridge was giving them one version. A version with a logo and a law firm. And centuries of credibility behind it. Tyrese was just a teenager with a phone. And a memory they were trying to edit. The stress began to wear him down in ways he hadn't anticipated. He stopped sleeping. He started waking up with tightness in his chest, his heart pounding before he even opened his eyes. Food lost its taste. Words, once easy, began to twist on his tongue. He stopped checking messages. His hands hovered above the keyboard, but rarely typed back. Even supporters became overwhelming. Every "you got this" king felt like a demand to keep performing strength he no longer felt. Friends noticed. His mom noticed. One night, as he sat staring blankly at his laptop, she placed a hand on his shoulder. You don't have to fight all the time, she said softly. He didn't answer. How could he explain to her that not fighting meant surrendering a truth he had lived and suffered? The breaking point came when a media outlet invited Whitmore and a Cambridge rep onto a panel, and didn't invite Tyrese. They discussed him like a topic, a case study, a headline without a human behind it. Whitmore called the incident a misunderstanding amplified by emotion, and the viral dynamics of the internet. The host nodded along. There was no challenge, no pushback, just a polite close. Let's hope cooler heads prevail in the future. That night, Tyrese stared at the wall for hours. His own memories began to feel like accusations. Was he misremembering? Had he misunderstood? Was he letting it all destroy him? The gaslighting wasn't just public, it was inside him now. A war between what he knew and what they wanted him to doubt. But then something shifted. It came quietly, through email. The subject line read, "You don't know me, but I was there." The message was short. I worked for Cambridge for 5 years. I saw what they did, what they're doing now. You're not crazy. They're lying. If you want proof, I can help. But it has to be anonymous for now. Tyrese reread it 3 times. He didn't breathe until he finished the 4th. The ghost he'd been fighting finally had a shadow. A former Cambridge employee contacts Tyrese anonymously. Tyrese stared at the screen, blinking slowly. The subject line still glowed at the top of the inbox. You don't know me, but I was there. The email that followed had been brief, but it sliced through the silence like a blade. I worked for Cambridge for 5 years. I saw what they did, what they're doing now. You're not crazy. They're lying. If you want proof, I can help. But it has to be anonymous for now. He had read it so many times that the words began to echo in his head, overlapping with the hundreds of doubts, denials and dismissals he'd been carrying like bricks in his chest. But now, proof, or at least the chance of it. His fingers trembled as he typed 2 words. I'm listening. It felt like a declaration, not of war, but of truth. The email response came only hours later. No name, no flair, just an alias Trinity former, and a link encrypted with a password. The message said only, this is just the beginning. Don't share it yet. If they find out it came from me, I'll lose more than my job. Tyrese's pulse quickened. He followed every instruction, careful not to open the files on cloud storage, careful not to back them up. Local only, no metadata exposure. The air around him felt thick, like history was about to crawl out of hiding. When he opened the first file, he stopped breathing. It was a series of emails, internal Cambridge correspondence between senior administrators and department heads, all marked within a few days after the Visiting Scholars Showcase. Subject lines read like silent alarms: Langston visibility risk, event optics concerns, unofficial guest protocol. The language was deliberate, careful, and yet cold to the core. One message stood out, circled in red. His onstage moment poses long-term reputational risks. Our brand must remain grounded in heritage, not exception. Another added calmly. We cannot allow this narrative to frame Cambridge as outperformed by an unsanctioned guest, especially one not formally registered through UK academic channels. Therese leaned back in his chair, stunned. It wasn't even about him. Not really. Not about his math, his mind, his moment. It was about protecting the image of the institution. He hadn't been erased by mistake. He had been removed on purpose, because he didn't fit the storyline they'd written for themselves. He was never supposed to be part of their history. The next document was worse. A scanned transcript of a closed-door faculty meeting. No cameras. No press. Just administrators in a room, discussing strategy like corporate executives. One line hit like a hammer. Treat footage from the lecture as non-official. Reference administrative errors if pressed. Remove all mentions of the student from post-event materials. Another suggested creating a narrative pivot. Emphasize ambiguity around participation. If challenged, present our version as definitive. They weren't reacting. They were executing a plan. Therese felt a nausea rise in his throat. But the files weren't finished. The third folder contained video. Shaky phone footage taken discreetly by someone sitting in the back of a Cambridge boardroom. The voices were unmistakable. Faculty. Senior ones. And there, clear as glass, was Whitmore himself. Laughing. "The American kid," Whitmore said, smirking. "Please. He got lucky. The problem wasn't even done when he jumped up. They'll forget about him by next month." Someone else laughed, then added with a chuckle. "Until then, we remind them he wasn't actually part of the program. That's enough to keep the story from sticking." Therese watched the footage 3 times, each replay heavier than the last. Not only had Whitmore lied to the media, he had bragged about it privately, and the people around him had smiled, nodded, and reinforced the lie. It wasn't one man acting out of pride. It was a system closing ranks. Then came the final blow. A PDF file labeled Crisis Strategy, Langston Narrative. Therese opened it with shaking hands. Inside, a full corporate-style roadmap, scheduled press statements, talking points, social media engagement strategies, risk mitigation options. The page that gutted him most included a red box directive that read, "Reframe racial allegations as procedural confusion. Shift discussion from bias to bureaucracy. Use the phrase Cambridge values academic integrity above all." They had rehearsed how to erase him, planned how to discredit him, scripted the entire gaslight campaign from the start. Therese pushed back from the desk, eyes wide, breath shallow. He had always known deep down, in his bones, that what he experienced wasn't an accident. But now, with the proof in his hands, he felt the burden double. Because now he knew. And once you know, you can't unknow. You either act or become complicit. He couldn't just post it all. Not yet. He needed it to land with weight, with strategy. The files weren't gossip. They were evidence. And evidence needed a platform, one that wouldn't just go viral, but would be taken seriously. He needed someone who could validate the files, investigate the claims, and protect the source. He needed a journalist. The next few days were a blur of encrypted emails, referral threads, pitch calls. He reached out to outlets that specialized in deep investigations, those known for taking down the powerful with precision. Some were interested. Most were cautious. One in particular, a powerhouse known for Pulitzer-winning exposés, requested a full meeting. Therese logged onto the video call, hopeful, exhausted, but ready. He walked them through the files, redacted names, provided timestamps. He even showed the original emails and metadata. The 3-person team listened intently, asked detailed questions, took notes. When he finished, one of them looked straight at him and said, "This could change everything." Therese felt his shoulders drop for the first time in weeks. Maybe, finally, the truth was going to be heard. 2 days later, the email arrived. It was respectful, professional, and devastating. "After internal review, we've decided not to pursue the Cambridge Langston story at this time. While the materials provided are compelling, the lack of named sources and the sensitive nature of the internal communications present verification challenges under our editorial standards. We encourage Mr. Langston to explore alternate channels for redress." Alternate channels? The same channels that had ignored him, threatened him, lied about him. Therese sat in silence. For a moment, the world seemed to spin without him. He felt the numbness return, the kind that comes after betrayal, not pain. They had everything. The emails, the recordings, the strategy documents, and still they walked away. He couldn't scream, couldn't cry. He just sat there, letting the reality wash over him like ice. The system didn't care that he had truth. It cared about safety, about hierarchy, Still deep beneath the exhaustion, something stirred. A flicker. If the giants wouldn't publish it, maybe the independents would. Or maybe, he thought, just maybe, he wouldn't need them at all. The biggest investigative outlet in the US refuses to publish the story. Tyrese sat in the dim light of his small apartment, the glow from his laptop screen the only illumination in the room. Outside, the city hummed with indifferent traffic, but inside the quiet felt heavier than ever. A week had passed since he had delivered the files from the whistleblower, the emails, the transcript, the covert video, the internal crisis management memos, the kind of documents no respectable major outlet could ignore. And yet here he was, staring at another rejection. The subject line read simply, "Decline to publish." He opened it more out of habit than hope, and as he read the carefully courteous language, terms like editorial reservations, insufficient on-record sourcing, concerns about legal liability, a hollow ache spread through him. The verdict had already been delivered before he even began. The story was too dangerous, too messy, too much for them to risk. He closed his eyes and pressed his forehead against the laptop. The rejection felt like their final blow, a confirmation that power didn't crumble under truth, but protected itself by burying it. The newsroom's note had ended with an invitation. "We wish you well in your continued pursuit of justice." But wishing well was the kind of corporate sympathy that sharpened the cost of speaking up. In the silence that followed, Tyrese felt the weight of an emptiness he hadn't known since childhood. When teachers, adults, authority figures had dismissed him long before he even spoke out loud. He remembered the hope he had felt when the whistleblower first emailed him, a flicker of clarity in a world built on erasure. He had imagined headlines, justice, a reckoning. Instead, he had been met with silence. Official silence, legal threats, media doors slammed in his face. The irony wasn't lost on him. The same society that had celebrated viral outrage now shied away when outrage came with evidence, with names, with consequences. In the following days, the whistleblower alias Trinity Former disappeared. No more emails, no reassurance. The secure channel went dark. The only sign that the person had ever existed was the folder of documents saved deep in Tyrese's machine. That fact alone made his gut drop every time he opened his messages. Fear mixed with guilt. He wondered if the leak had already been traced, if the whistleblower had been fired, or worse. The knowledge weighed on him heavily, because without that source he was alone again. The files belonged to no one but him. He was the visible holder of secret truth, vulnerable, exposed, isolated. Meanwhile, the narrative online began to shift with horrifying speed. The social media storm cooled, and people moved on. The hashtags died down. New controversies replaced them. But the silence that followed gave space for whisper campaigns, for insinuations, for slow poison. On message boards he once checked for solidarity, people typed carefully, "This seems obsessive. Why does he keep pushing this? Maybe he's unstable." Some public commenters declared him a delusional boy chasing attention. Others accused him of exaggeration, of lying for clicks. In forums and comment threads they debated whether the original footage was misleading, whether the whistleblower files were planted, or worse, faked, doctored, just another viral stunt. No evidence, no verification, just suspicion, just doubt, just the smell of a system cleaning itself after an embarrassment. Tyrese tried to respond sometimes. He tried to defend the truth. He tried to show the files. He tried to explain why validation through mainstream journalism mattered, because without it, his narrative would always be a rumor born in black and white code and legal threats. But every time he spoke up, the response was colder than before. He began receiving messages, not friendly ones. Anonymous accounts warned him. Some offered help, but with conditions. Others mocked him, and the one outlet he thought might carry the truth, one that had promised to dig deeper, it walked away quietly, closing the file and locking the door. For the first time, Tyrese felt how truly painful isolation could become, when the weight you carry wasn't just personal, but structural. When your best evidence, your clearest truth, becomes damning only because it cannot be verified by the standards of a system built to exclude you. He realized then what reality really meant for someone like him. Justice only matters when it's convenient, and truth only matters when it doesn't disrupt reputation. Friends stopped calling. People who had praised him when the viral video first broke suddenly became distant. Support dwindled. Like light fading from a room slowly shuttered shut. His phone rang less. DMs stopped. Even his math teacher from Baltimore, once so proud, sent a brief message. I'm sorry this is so messy. Stay safe. Apology wrapped in caution. Safe distance. Another way of saying when the cost is too high, step back. For a while Tyrese considered giving up. Deleting the folder. Letting the story fade. Starting over. Maybe going back to anonymity. Maybe going silent. The temptation was sharp. It whispered in the dark corners of his mind during sleepless nights. No story. No fight. No pain. And with that going quiet, maybe you'd exist again, without scrutiny. But there was one thought louder than the rest. If he didn't try, if he didn't fight, then nothing would change. Not for him, and not for anyone else like him. Because for every story erased, there would be another young black kid swallowed by silence. Another truth misfiled by fear. Another brilliance dismissed by design. He couldn't allow it. That resolve hardened slowly, tentatively, but steadily. He began reaching out again. This time to smaller outlets. Black-owned media channels, independent online magazines, grassroots journalism collectives. Less power, less reach. But something they still retained. The willingness to listen, the willingness to risk. One contact responded within a day. A small but respected black-owned media group, with a modest but dedicated readership. Their editor wrote, "We've seen what mainstream refuses to touch. We want to tell your story. We can't promise big headlines, but we can promise honesty, full publication, no censorship. One condition though, you must go on record." Tyrese stared at the message for a long time. Go on record. Use his name. Face their scrutiny. With everything already stacked against him, that request felt like a second trial. Trial by media. Trial by public opinion. Trial by doubt. His chest tightened at the thought. He could lose more. Privacy. Control. Maybe even safety. But he also recognized what he stood to gain. Visibility. His truth. Broadcast plainly. The risk was enormous. But the potential was real. He closed the laptop. His mind felt foggy. Heavy. He thought of the kid from Baltimore, quiet math prodigy, just trying to learn, to belong, to prove something honest. And now that kid stood somewhere between despair and defiance, pushed to the edge but not broken yet. He realized that going public with the media group meant more than his own vindication. It meant opening the door for others who had no voice. Others whose brilliance had been silently edited out of history. He picked up his phone. His fingers hovered over the send button. He could type yes, or he could delete the message. Yes meant risking everything. Yes meant facing the world again, with all its damage, but on his own terms. No meant disappearing again. Safe, but forgotten, invisible. The silence lingered. The room felt cold. The city outside didn't stop humming. But in that moment something inside him stirred. Quiet, hard, determined. A black-owned media channel takes interest with one condition. Tyrese must go public. Tyrese sat at the edge of his bedroom chair, trembling slightly. Not from fear but from the weight of the last 24 hours. The decision to go public had not come easily. He'd stared at the message from the black-owned media channel for hours. Mind racing, heart pounding, stomach hollow. He knew the risks. He knew the cost. Yet something deeper, a quiet resolve born of every erased name, every whispered doubt, every late-night tear, nudged him forward. At midnight, he typed the single word yes. Then he closed his eyes, braced himself and pressed send. By morning his life had already changed. The interview was scheduled for later that afternoon. The reporter, a woman named Vanessa Clark, called to walk him through the process, gently, respectfully. She spoke like someone who believed in truth more than headlines. "We'll give you the space," she said, "to speak exactly how it happened. No sensationalism, just facts. Your voice." Her words echoed in his mind. Your voice. When the camera turned on, Tyrese didn't hesitate. He began at the beginning. The scholarship showcase. The board, the professor smiling and saying, "Wanna try?" The chalk in his hand. The silence as he solved the equation. He walked the viewers through what followed. The erasure from the official program. The hot mic slip backstage at the math competition. The leaked files from the whistleblower, showing internal emails. The campaign of denial led by powerful institutions. The legal threats disguised as bureaucratic memos. The silent rejections by every major outlet. He showed screenshots, timestamps, blurred identities where needed, but always kept his own name visible. His hands sometimes shook, but his voice remained steady. firm, calm, raw. They tried to erase me, he said quietly, eyes fixed on the camera. Not just for one moment, for everything I could become. He paused, took a breath and continued. This isn't about revenge, it's about truth, about accountability, about letting people know that when you're black and brilliant, they'll applaud you, then disappear you. By the time he finished, the room was silent. The only sound was the soft click of the camera turning off. Outside, the world waited. Within hours, the video exploded. Shares turned into thousands, thousands into millions. The hashtags changed. Untruth for Reese. No more silence. Black genius exists. Social media lit up like a city at dawn. People who had never heard his name before were now echoing his truth. Teachers, students, professionals, elders, all weighed in. Some with support, others with anger, many with disbelief that something like this had taken place in plain daylight, under the roof of one of the world's most prestigious institutions. But with visibility came visibility's darker twin, danger. By evening, his phone buzzed with messages. Some from strangers offering support. Some from others threatening violence if he didn't shut up. A few from accounts with generic profile pictures, sending screenshots of his home address, information he had never shared publicly. His chest tightened. For the first time since all this began, fear felt real. Not the fear of dismissal, of erasure, but fear for his family, his mother, his younger sister. He called them, his voice breaking. His mom's silence on the phone was long, heavy. When she finally spoke, it was measured and trembling. You did what you felt was right, she said. But we're scared now. Please be safe. He could not promise her that. But he could promise he would try. Meanwhile, his high school in Baltimore, the one that had suspended him, began internal hearings. The administration sent out forms, statements to sign, media policy acknowledgments, warnings about conduct unbecoming of a student representing the school publicly. Teachers gave perfunctory pats on the shoulder, but avoided eye contact. Classmates whispered, some posted memes mocking him, a few quietly buying his back with social media likes, but nothing real, nothing supported. The math team coaches told him he was effectively dismissed pending review. The calculus teacher unfriended him on social media. A coach who used to encourage him to compete in national math tournaments didn't return call. Tyrese walked through the school hallways one afternoon, feeling invisible and exposed at the same time, a contradiction that twisted inside him. He opened his locker to find a printed flyer, taped across its door. Don't be a clown for clicks. There was no name, no signature, just spray paint style letters. The message was clear. Show up, be seen, then disappear the same way they always made him disappear. At home, he stopped sleeping more than 3 hours a night. He double-checked the locks. He stopped leaving the house after dark. Every sound made him jump. Every knock on the door made his heart race. He tried to study, but the numbers blurred. Equations once crisp and sharp in his mind now felt fuzzy, disjointed, heavy. The world he had trusted, knowledge, merit, truth, seemed to buckle under the weight of threats and doubt. But underneath the fear, anger grew. Not the kind of shallow rage that snaps and shouts. A colder, deeper kind. The kind that steals every nerve, steals every decision. He realized that speaking out had made him a target. But silence had never been safe. Silence had been the weapon they used. At dawn, he opened his laptop again and found a new email. The sender, an unknown law firm based in Washington, D.C. The subject, pro bono representation offer. His breath caught. He read it carefully. They had seen the interview. They believed in the evidence. They offered to represent him for free. No fees, no hidden clauses. They wanted to file civil actions. Defamation, institutional negligence, violations of civil rights. They wanted to bring in independent investigators, lawyers, fact-finder, someone to shake the foundations until the truth couldn't stay buried. He stared at the screen, stunned. The offer felt like a lifeline thrown across a storm-swollen sea. But at the same time it felt surreal, like someone handing light to a ghost. After everything, the denials, threats, erasures, real people, real lawyers, believed his story. Still the fear lingered. If he accepted, the spotlight would intensify. The backlash would grow. The threats might escalate, not just to him, but to his family, his future, his peace. And yet, there was a shift. He no longer felt hidden. He felt seen. Maybe not accepted. Maybe not safe, but visible. And there was power in visibility. He closed the email, leaned back, and looked out the window. The city lights flickered, distant, impersonal. But for the first time in weeks, he felt something that resembled hope. Not naive hope, steady, rooted hope. A sense that maybe, just maybe, the fight could end not in silence but in justice. The doorbell rang then, sudden and unexpected. His heart jolted. He froze for a second too long, before rising to answer it. On the porch stood a man in a dark suit, coat hanging heavy, his face unreadable under streetlight. He extended an envelope. No words, just an envelope. Therese's hand closed around it slowly. Inside, legal documents. Official looking. The seal crisp. The letterhead familiar. The name of the law firm, underlined Grayson and Meyer LLP. He opened it. The offer was real. Not a scam. Not a trap. Real representation. Real resources. Real support. The paper felt heavy in his hand. He exhaled. Light. Heavy. Hope. Fear. He looked down at the letterhead. He looked back at the empty street. The quiet waiting. He realized, whatever happened next, the hearings, the lawsuits, the public scrutiny, the risk, it would be on his terms. He would not be silenced again. A law firm offers to represent Tyrese pro bono. Tyrese felt the weight of the world shift the day his lawyers filed the lawsuit. It began early in the morning, inside a modest office in Washington, D.C., where two sharp-suit attorneys from the firm Grayson and Meyer sat across from him. Faces grave but determined. On the polished mahogany table lay stacks of printed documents, internal emails, transcripts, video stills, the crisis strategy dossier, the Langston optics memos, and the backstage recording from the event host. What had been scattered evidence, whispers and social media outrage, had transformed into a formal legal complaint, a U.S. civil suit, alleging academic racism, reputational damage, defamation and violation of civil rights. The filing name Tyrese Langston v. University of Cambridge, et al. The digital timestamp glowed on the first page. Once submitted, it would be public record. Irreversible. Tyrese sat back, chest tight. The attorneys offered water, small reassurances. "We're doing this for real," one said, voice quiet. "Not just for you, for every student who got erased." Tyrese nodded. His mind drifted for a moment across the Atlantic, back to the lecture hall, the chalkboard, the silence, back to suspicion, erasure, and finally a stumbling claim of justice. The filing alone felt like a step onto a tightrope. He didn't know whether he would make it across, but he couldn't turn back. News of the lawsuit hit global headlines by noon. The internet fragmented into camps, outraged supporters, skeptical commentators, institutional loyalists. Some called him courageous. Others called him a social media attention seeker, with legal fantasy. Yet the filing forced the issue into courts, not comment threads. Media crews camped outside D.C. courthouses. Film crews rolled. Cameras flashed. For the first time, this wasn't about a viral clip. This was about real names, legal procedures, and consequences. Tyrese was no longer just a teen with a phone. He was plaintiff. Across the ocean, the initial reaction from Cambridge was swift and predictable. Within hours they released a brief statement. The university does not accept the jurisdiction of U.S. courts over its institutional practices and enjoys sovereign immunity under UK law. We intend to move for dismissal on that basis. Lawyers familiar with international cases predicted a near-automatic dismissal under sovereign immunity rules. It was a standard shield, powerful, cold, and built for protection. Many assumed the suit would die quietly disappear, like so many other institutional challenges before it. Still, his lawyers pressed on. They filed in a U.S. federal district court, arguing that because the actions erasure, defamation, suppression of free speech had real material impact on Tyrese's reputation, scholarship opportunities, mental health, and future earnings potential in the U.S. The court had jurisdiction, and more, they argued that institutions that accept applicants from the U.S. and whose global brand impacts American applicants cannot claim complete immunity when operations and damages reach American soil. It was novel, it was contentious, but it was their angle. The world watched. Universities, legal scholars, civil rights advocates, and media pundits weighed in. Some called the case a landmark test of international academic accountability. Others called it absurd. "You can't sue a centuries-old institution across borders," said one commentator on a televised panel. "It's naive, opportunistic, and legally messy." But beneath the date there was tension, the unsettling recognition that history, privilege, and legacy might no longer be untouchable. Behind closed doors, Cambridge responded differently. Senior administrators met. Their faces showed strain. One of the internal memos leaked soon after spoke of unintended consequences and financial and reputational exposure. They began prepping damage control, dusting off legal precedents, summoning old alumni networks, preparing statements about youthful misunderstanding, lack of formal registration, and procedural oversight. They attempted to recreate the same narrative that had worked after the showcase: erasure, rewriting, confusion. Only this time, the suit ensured there was a record, public, unalterable, legal. Pre-trial hearings began 3 months later. Tyrese's lawyers requested discovery, internal documents, communications logs, assignment records for the event, server logs showing who authorized video deletion or removal, emails to PR teams instructing erasure, and statements from staff and faculty. Cambridge's attorneys responded with motions to dismiss, citing immunity, jurisdictional issues, and lack of standing. For every request, they offered vague denials or overbroad confidentiality. Tyrese squandered sleep nights reading filings, stacking arguments, double-checking dates, matching email headers to event schedules. Each page felt like a battlefield. Publicly, the backlash intensified. Alumni newsletters buzzed with outrage. Some called the lawsuit a smear, a betrayal. Others quietly sided with him. Bulletin boards at colleges debated the ethics of institutional legacy protection. Social media resurrected the old clips, now accompanied by subtitles and translations, anecdotal accounts from other marginalized students who had faced similar erasures at elite institutions. Suddenly, Tyrese's moment was no longer isolated. It became part of a pattern. Then, an unexpected twist. During a discovery request, one of Cambridge's junior staff members, an IT administrator based in a branch office, leaked internal server logs, showing that video from the showcase was indeed uploaded to secure archives, and then deliberately purged after legal review. The file name included Tyrese's name. The timestamp matched the morning after the event. That alone contradicted the university's previous claim that no such footage was ever part of their official archives. When the logs were submitted in court, the defense flinched. Soon after, the court granted a partial motion to allow a limited regional hearing on whether Cambridge's purge constituted unlawful destruction of evidence. It was a small win, but it cracked the shield of sovereign immunity just enough to force conversation. As discovery deepened, more emerged. A former contractor for the video recording company came forward under confidentiality agreement, claiming that he was instructed to delete the Langston segment by a Cambridge official, citing brand protection. His affidavit was dramatic. He described the look on the coordinator's face when told to delete it: relief, fear, and pride all tangled. He described the deletion log, the warnings, the encrypted override. The file name was changed to event optional reject. Even the digital footprint had been scrubbed. But forensic reconstruction showed residual data clusters, fragments of compressed video, enough to confirm the deletion order. The courtroom walls felt smaller then, the air heavier. For the first time, Tyrese sensed real fear among his opponents. Sophisticated legal teams, alumni boards, institutional lawyers, quietly reorganizing. But outside the walls, his story began to shift. What had once looked like a fringe controversy turned into a public debate about institutional racism, academic elitism, transparency, and accountability. Universities worldwide released bland statements promising internal reviews. Scholars wrote op-eds demanding reform. Students at other famed institutions staged sit-ins. Even high school math clubs posted solidarity messages. The phrase "legacy cannot override truth" began circulating. Tyrese, however, was slipping under the weight of expectation. Sleep was rare. Calls from journalists, activists, students, and worried supporters flooded his phone. His family, still reeling, worried every time he left the house. He moved between rented apartments for months. College acceptance letters paused. Scholarships evaporated. Doors he once opened with brilliance were now guarded by silence. The fight for justice was changing everything, and costing everything. Then, at dawn on a crisp Friday, the judge handed down a preliminary decision. The case would proceed. Cambridge was instructed to preserve all documents, archives, and any remaining footage. They lost their motion to dismiss. It was unprecedented. Institutional immunity had been challenged and cracked. The media erupted. Headlines screamed, Cambridge forced to answer, legacy versus accountability, teen courage versus centuries of silence. Tyrese sat alone in a courthouse hallway, papers stacked like bricks around him, a mixture of relief, fear, and exhaustion washing over his bones. He had won a battle, but the war wasn't over. Behind the scenes, though, Cambridge attempted a final maneuver. Through anonymous legal filings, they released a counterclaim that Tyrese had misrepresented the event, that the showcase invitation he held was forged or unofficial, and that he had accepted financial support outside of approved channels, something that, if true, could break the legal standing of his claim. It was a calculated strike. Fire a second arrow while the first is still lodged in the process. Media outlets replayed the accusations. Did he fake the invite? Is this lawsuit just revenge? Was the video doctored from the start? Some journalists leaned in. Others backed away. Public opinion splintered again. Suddenly, the narrative swung between outrage and skepticism. Tyrese felt the ground vanish under him. For hours, he stared at the official notice of counterclaim, the legal jargon dancing mockingly on the screen. He desperately wanted to scream at the institution, at the world, at the cold machinery built to protect age, status, and legacy. But he stayed still, tight, focused. When his lawyer called, voice low and steady, he listened. "We expected this," she said. "This is their last move. But we still have evidence. We still have control." She explained that the counterclaim would force him to provide more documentation, proof of the original invitation, school records, his own communications, even background checks. It would be invasive, painful. It might drag on for years. It might destroy him. But it was the price of truth. Outside, cameras clicked. Reporters waited. Others whispered about the risk of flop, the danger of unproven claims, the damage to legacy. But amidst the noise, one thing remained stubbornly clear. The court had opened a door. And though the path was murky, the crack in the wall was real. Tyrese left the courthouse that evening, under an umbrella of flashlights and microphones. He refused to speak. His eyes darted past the crowd, until they found something still. The sunset, pale and steady, reminding him of a time before all this began. Home, Baltimore. Math class. Possibility. He closed his eyes, breathed, and whispered to himself, "I didn't come this far to disappear again." He reached into his backpack and pulled out a folder inside. A fresh stack of subpoenaed documents from Cambridge, including attendance logs, invoice receipts for the building's AV services, and emails showing internal debates about the risk of unsanctioned appearance. Every page felt like a nail in their coffin. But just as he gathered the papers, his phone buzzed. His lawyer's name flashed on the screen. With a steady, almost cold tone, she said, "You've been summoned to testify, under oath, on live television. National broadcast." Tyrese closed the folder. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from gravity. The world was about to hear him speak again. Not once via clips or leaks, not through files or tweets, but live, under oath, with every eye watching, with every legacy trembling. Tyrese is called to testify under oath on live television. The morning of Tyrese's testimony began with a silence so sharp it felt like sound. He stood in the small green room behind the federal courtroom, his palms damp, a glass of water untouched on the table. Outside the door, the world gathered, news cameras, reporters, protesters, supporters, skeptics, academics, students, celebrities, strangers. Millions waited behind screens. Headlines bordered on breathless anticipation. Teen math prodigy to testify live in landmark case. Another writ. Cambridge v. Truth. For once it felt accurate. His attorney Marcia Hale sat across from him. Folders spread like wings on the table. She watched him with the steady patience of someone who had shepherded dozens of clients into battle. But even she seemed aware this moment was different. "Tyrese," she said softly, "you don't have to be perfect today. You only have to be honest." He exhaled slowly, nodding, but inside he felt that familiar tightening in his chest. The pressure of eyes, history, expectation. Honesty had always been his gift. It was the world that struggled to hold it. A knock sounded. A court officer cracked open the door. "It's time." As Tyrese stepped into the corridor, he felt the weight shift in the air. Every footstep echoed down the long polished floor. His mother walked beside him, trying to hide the tremor in her hands. When he reached the double doors of the courtroom, she squeezed his arm. "I'm proud of you," she whispered, voice barely audible. "No matter what happens." He steadied himself with her words. The courtroom was full, overflowing. In fact, extra screens had been set up in adjacent rooms. Every seat taken, every camera pointed. Tyrese moved to the witness stand. The sound of his heartbeat pulsed in his ears. The judge gave a brief instruction. The oath was read, and he raised his hand. "I do," he said. His voice didn't waver. The camera lights flickered on, and suddenly he wasn't just in a courtroom. He was in front of the world. Marcia began the questioning gently. "Tyrese, I want to start at the beginning. Tell the court in your own words, what happened on the day you attended the Cambridge event?" Tyrese swallowed once, then spoke. His voice was calm, steady, layered with a quiet force. "I was invited to the Visiting Scholars Showcase. I traveled from Baltimore. I walked into the lecture hall, hoping to learn, and instead, I walked into a room waiting for me to fail." He paused only long enough to breathe. "The lecturer asked me if I wanted to try. He didn't say it like a teacher inviting a student to learn. He said it like someone daring me to embarrass myself. The whole room, it felt like they were expecting me to fall." The courtroom listened in absolute stillness. Even the judge leaned subtly forward. Tyrese continued. "I solved the problem, not because I wanted to impress anyone, because I knew I could. When I finished, there was no applause, no acknowledgement, no eye contact. They resumed the lecture like nothing had happened." He described the erasure that followed, the missing photos, the deleted listings, the email claiming clerical error. He explained how Cambridge altered their program summary, how they denied his presence, how they later claimed no memory of the moment. When Marcia presented the printed documents, the side-by-side screenshots of the original and edited event pages, the courtroom murmured. "And when you went viral?" she asked. Tyrese stared down at his hands. "They pretended I imagined the entire thing." He walked slowly through the moment the host's mic caught the words. Someone needed to humble him. Supporters in the audience stiffened. A few shook their heads in disbelief. Tyrese went on, step by step through the rejection from major news outlets, the threats to his family, the school's attempt to expel him, the silent disappearance of the whistleblower. Then came the files. For the first time publicly, he spoke of the crisis strategy memo, the internal emails, describing him as a reputational risk, the meeting transcript where faculty joked about his moment. He didn't embellish, he didn't dramatize, he spoke plainly, letting the evidence carry its own weight. When Marcia projected one line on the large screen behind him, "Shift discussion from racial bias to procedural confusion whenever possible," a wave of gasps rippled through the courtroom. Next came the cross-examination. Cambridge's lead attorney, a polished man with silver hair and the cool confidence of institutional power, approached with a measured smile. "Mr. Langston," he began, voice smooth as glass, "do you believe it's possible that you misunderstood the tone of the lecturer's comment?" Tyrese didn't flinch. "No." "Do you believe," the attorney continued, "that the university staff acted with malicious intent? Or could this be a simple case of miscommunication blown out of proportion by online virality?" Tyrese looked directly at him. "If it were a miscommunication, they wouldn't have erased me." The attorney blinked, a brief crack in composure. "You're aware," he said, shifting, "that your attendance was never formally recorded, that by our documentation, you were not registered." "That's because they deleted my registration," Tyrese cut in, still calm. "It's in the files. Your files." The courtroom erupted, gasps, murmurs, reporters scribbling furiously. The judge struck the gavel. "Order." The attorney tried again, pushing harder. "Mr. Langston, are you claiming that Cambridge University, an institution of global academic prestige, deliberately falsified documents to damage you?" Tyrese inhaled. His voice softened. "I'm claiming they didn't expect someone like me to shine, and when I did, they didn't know how to handle it, so they erased it." The attorney hesitated. His jaw tightened. He turned away. Tyrese's testimony spread far beyond the courtroom. Across screens, living rooms, classrooms, dorm lounges, phones held in trembling hands. Clips flooded social media. Academics on Twitter wrote thread after thread. Activists reposted quotes. Celebrities tagged him with words of support. A popular science communicator tweeted, "Brilliance should be celebrated, not buried." A tech CEO offered him an internship. A major philanthropist posted, "This young man embodies integrity." For the first time since the nightmare began, Tyrese felt something shift, not just in the room, but in the world around him. People were listening, not to the institutions, to him. But with every wave of praise came backlash from the university's defenders. Editorials emerged questioning whether his perception was too subjective. Commentators insisted Cambridge wouldn't risk its reputation over one teenager. Anonymous accounts resurfaced claiming he was exaggerating for fame. The usual voices attempting to dilute the truth just enough to create doubt. Inside the courtroom, Cambridge's legal team began fumbling under pressure. They stumbled over dates. Their explanations contradicted earlier filings. Their attempt to paint Tyrese as misremembering fell apart when Marcia introduced the internal deletion logs recovered by the former contractor. One juror visibly shook their head as the defense struggled to explain how never recorded matched with deleted after review. Meanwhile, protesters gathered outside the courthouse with signs. "Truth doesn't need permission. Erasure is violence. We stand with Tyrese." The noise grew so loud at one point that the judge ordered the windows closed. Inside, Tyrese remained steady, until one moment nearly broke him. His mother was called to testify. She spoke about the night she found him crying after Cambridge removed his name, about the threats sent to their home, about the sleepless nights, the school's attempt to push him out, the weight he carried alone, until the lawsuit when she spoke the words, "He didn't deserve this." Her voice cracked. Tyrese couldn't look at her. He stared at the wood grain of the table, fighting tears. The courtroom felt smaller then, heavy with the grief of a mother watching her son battle a giant. By the time testimony entered its final hour, fatigue settled into the room. The judge's tone had softened. The jurors seemed reflective, even sympathetic. Marcia stood again, voice steady. "Your Honor, the plaintiff would like to enter one more motion." The judge nodded. "Proceed." Marcia looked toward the back of the courtroom. "We call a new witness, previously unavailable. Someone with direct knowledge of the events in question." Cameras swiveled. The energy shifted. Reporters scrambled. Tyrese felt his pulse spike. Marcia continued. "The witness has agreed to testify regarding the original interaction during the Cambridge lecture. Their identity may be familiar." The courtroom doors opened. A tall figure entered. Thin, pale, silver-rimmed glasses, sharp cheekbones, a gait filled with dread. Tyrese's breath caught. It was him. The lecturer. The man who smirked at him, mocked him, dared him. Professor Elliot Whitmore. The courtroom erupted into chaos. A surprise witness is announced. The original lecturer who mocked Tyrese. The moment Professor Elliot Whitmore stepped into the courtroom, the air shifted into a tension so tight it felt breakable. Tyrese felt his chest seize, not out of fear but from the collision of past and present. This was the man whose smirk had carved itself into his memory. The man who had turned a lecture hall into a stage for humiliation. The man whose casual cruelty had set this entire nightmare in motion. Now he looked older somehow, paler, shoulders hunched as if weighed down by something heavier than reputation. When he lowered himself into the witness chair, even the reporters fell silent. The judge asked his name for the record. "Elliot Jonathan Whitmore," he said, voice brittle at the edges. He glanced at Tyrese only once, and in that split second, Tyrese saw something he hadn't expected: fear. It flickered across the professor's face like a shadow passing over glass. Then the oath was read, and Whitmore raised his hand. "I do." Marcia Hale approached him slowly, her expression unreadable. She had been preparing for this moment, anticipating every dodge and deflection, but Whitmore surprised her before she even asked a question. "I want to begin by saying something," he said, voice cracking slightly. Marcia turned to the judge, who nodded. Permission granted. Whitmore swallowed. What happened that day, the day Mr. Langston stood up in that lecture hall, was not spontaneous. A ripple of sound swept through the courtroom. Gasps, whispered curses, stunned exhalations. Whitmore continued, fingers gripping the edge of the stand. "I was instructed, directly instructed, to challenge him in a way that would expose his limitations." Tyrese's stomach dropped. Expose his limitations. The words echoed like a blade dragged against concrete. Marcia steadied herself. "Professor Whitmore," she said, "are you telling this court that Cambridge gave you directives regarding Mr. Langston before the event?" Whitmore nodded once, slowly. "Yeah." The room erupted again. The judge hammered the gavel. Order restored reluctantly. Whitmore took a shaky breath. "I was told," he continued, That Mr. Langston was, how they phrased it, an enthusiastic American student from a non-traditional background. They believed he might disrupt the academic order of the session if given too much attention. They instructed me to control the room dynamic. Marcia narrowed her eyes. What do you mean by control? Whitmore hesitated, looked down, then forced the words out. To discourage him. Gasps again. This time, deeper, angrier. He corrected himself quickly, almost clumsily, not physically, not directly, just academically, politely, with subtlety. They said if he attempted to participate, I should make the challenge feel beyond him, to keep him in his place. Those last 4 words hung in the air like ash. Tyrese felt his pulse pounding. His palms were sweating. Behind him, his mother inhaled sharply. Somewhere in the courtroom, someone whispered, "My God." Marcia stepped closer. Who gave these instructions? Whitmore's face tightened. He closed his eyes briefly, as if choosing between 2 evils. The head of program review, he said, and the diversity compliance officer. The irony struck the room like lightning. Let the record show, Marcia said firmly, that Cambridge instructed the lecturer to deliberately embarrass a black student as a cautionary example. Whitmore winced at the phrasing. They told me it would help remind visiting students that Cambridge maintains rigorous standards. They said it was meant to protect the environment, lest external participants overshadow the purpose of the event. External participants. Tyrese felt heat spreading beneath his skin. Marcia walked to the evidence screen and brought up the blurred transcript from the internal Cambridge meeting, the one where Whitmore had laughed. His jaw tightened when he saw it. Projected. "Professor," she said, "you were also heard dismissing Mr. Langston as lucky." Whitmore swallowed hard. "Yeah. Was that how you felt?" He paused, struggled, then shook his head. "No. That was how I was expected to feel." "And yet," Marcia replied, "you complied." Whitmore's voice cracked. "I did." A long silence followed. The gallery held its breath, and I regret it. But regret, Tyrese thought, doesn't rebuild what you tried to break. Marcia pressed forward. "After Mr. Langston solved the equation faster than any student you had seen, what did you do?" Whitmore looked down. I panicked. "Why?" He hesitated, then forced out, "Because it contradicted what they told me, that he wouldn't be able to keep up, that he would stumble. When he solved it effortlessly, it made my actions obvious. It exposed the agenda." He swallowed. "So I contributed to his erasure. I let the PR team remove him from the event summary. I didn't challenge the statement that he wasn't registered. I stayed quiet when they called him a clerical error." His voice faltered, dropping into something close to shame. "I stayed quiet about everything." The courtroom erupted yet again. People stood. Reporters typed frantically. The judge warned the room sharply. Order slowly returned, but the shock did not fade. Marcia paused, then asked, "Why speak now?" Whitmore inhaled deeply, the kind of breath taken before ripping off a bandage. "Because the institution I tried to protect has now turned its power on me. They implied I fabricated memories. They denied giving me instructions. They said I acted alone, and when the pressure hit them, they hinted they may revoke my tenure. I realized then, if they would sacrifice me, they would sacrifice anyone. It was not guilt that drove him, it was self-preservation. But truth was truth, regardless of the vessel." Marcia nodded slowly. "Professor Whitmore, directly and clearly, did Cambridge University orchestrate a plan to diminish Mr. Langston's presence, undermine his achievement, and later erase evidence of his participation?" Whitmore's answer came without hesitation. "Yes." The courtroom exploded. The judge struck the gavel 3 times. Order. Order. But order was gone. The truth had detonated. For the first time, Cambridge's internal culture wasn't whispered about or hidden behind centuries of prestige. It was laid bare, exposed under oath on national television, delivered from the mouth of the very man who carried out its orders. And not even his attempt at remorse could blunt its impact. Whitmore continued speaking. Though the room's energy had shifted so violently, it felt like a physical wave. "I may regret my part," he said quietly, "but I cannot undo it. I can only tell the truth now." Marcia walked back to her table. Cambridge's legal team looked rattled. Papers shuffled, whispered exchanges urgent, one attorney's hand visibly shaking. Their defense strategy had cracked under the weight of Whitmore's confession. When the judge dismissed the witness, Whitmore stepped down, eyes clouded, shoulders caved inward. As he passed Tyrese, their eyes met briefly, Not in forgiveness, not in understanding, but in recognition of two lives forever altered by one institution's decision to protect itself. The judge cleared his throat. Members of the jury, given the gravity of the testimony, you will be dismissed early today. You will return tomorrow morning to begin deliberations. The courtroom was still buzzing as the judge exited. Reporters dashed out to file breaking updates. Activists cheered outside the courthouse. Cambridge's attorneys huddled like a collapsing fortress. Tyrese stood there, frozen. His mother embraced him tightly. For the first time, he allowed himself one deep, trembling breath. Then the bailiff announced, "The jury will begin deliberation immediately." Tyrese's eyes widened. The room fell silent again. No one expected deliberation to begin same day. That only happened when evidence was overwhelming or catastrophic. 4 hours later, a court officer re-entered the waiting area. His expression revealed nothing. "The jury," he said, "has reached a verdict." Tyrese's stomach dropped. The jury goes into deliberation and takes only 4 hours. The courthouse was unnaturally quiet when the bailiff's announcement came. The jury, having deliberated for only 4 hours, returned with what felt like the weight of centuries in its verdict. Tyrese stood in the center of the room, his mother beside him, attorneys around, cameras rolling. The judge read the verdict in a low, measured voice. The jury found in favor of the plaintiff, Tyrese Langston, on all counts: academic racism, institutional negligence, defamation, reputational damage. The words hit like thunder. For a moment, the wooden panels of the courtroom seemed to absorb the shock, then exhaled, releasing decades of tension. Gasps, tears, relief. The sound flooded over Tyrese. His mother wept quietly, her hand gripping his. Reporters leaned forward, pens scratching, cameras flashing. He could barely breathe. The legal papers printed, stamped, signed. A public apology ordered, monetary damages ordered. Enough to matter, but not the core of it. The most powerful demand: a full, public retraction from the institution, a published acknowledgement, recognizing him by name, and celebrating his contribution to the original lecture problem. Marcia Hale closed the folder gently. "You did it," she whispered to him, almost reverently. Tyrese nodded, voice caught in his throat. "We did it," he managed to say. Outside, in the overflow hallway, supporters, students, activists, strangers touched by his story, cheered. The phrase "justice served" trailed behind their voices, carried like wind through the corridors. Cambridge's lawyers sat frozen, faces pale. The institution's cloak of centuries-old immunity had torn under truth. The verdict cracked their facade, laid bare in court record, in public decree. International academic accountability, a phrase many had called impossible, had become a reality. The ruling sent shockwaves through education circles worldwide. Suddenly the narrative shifted. This wasn't just about one teen. This was about power, privilege, and the cost of silence. The institution released a statement within hours. "We acknowledge the court's ruling. We will comply with the ordered retraction and apology. We regret any distress caused to the student and learners worldwide." The words struck strangely, cold, formal, lacking genuine language, but they existed. They were real. And for the first time, the name Tyrese Langston stood in bold relief on Cambridge's own page. In classrooms across the globe, murmurs rippled. On social media, students posted photos of the verdict, screenshots of the retraction, reflections on systemic bias. A law professor from a major U.S. university tweeted, "This verdict sets precedent. Global institutions must answer for actions anywhere their influence reaches." Debates exploded about scholarship, access, representation, and legacy. Articles appeared across magazines, blogs, and journals analyzing the decision's long-term implications. Education watchdogs began dusting off policy papers on institutional accountability. For days, headlines were full of praise. Teen pushes Cambridge to recognize truth. Legacy no longer a shield. Black genius vindicated. Yet through all the noise, Tyrese stood quiet. He accepted hugs. He gave short statements to reporters. He thanked his lawyers. But inside, a strange emptiness coiled. The verdict cleared his name, vindicated him publicly, and forced an institution built on centuries of privilege to bend. It was monumental, historic, but when his mother tried to smile at him afterward, he couldn't bring himself to return it. Something in him felt hollow. That night, he sat alone in a dim motel room. The retraction notice was printed and framed. The apology letter from Cambridge hung beside it. He traced the letters with his fingertip, as if mapping the words into his memory, but they felt distant, like a dream he had read somewhere, not lived. The money awarded sat in his bank account, but felt like a stranger. He had wanted vindication, fairness, truth. He had gotten it, and yet the air around him felt charged, expectant, as if justice was only the beginning. He remembered the countless nights he cried alone, the algebra problems he solved under lamplight, the chalk dust on his fingers, the silence in lecture halls, where he was invisible, the threats, the denials, the deletion of his name. Now the record said he existed. Now the world had to acknowledge. But the silence that followed wasn't gone. It had shifted. It had mutated. Reporters continued knocking. Columnists asked hard questions. Others wanted to know what he intended to do with the damages. A few whispered, "Will he sue more?" as if relief and payment erased trauma. Some demanded he move on. Some tried to frame him as a victor in a concluded war. But he knew better. Winning a verdict didn't mean the world had changed. It meant a judge had spoken once. History might still try to rewrite him, to forget him again. In the morning light, he looked over the retraction and apology letter again. He read the words, "We deeply regret any distress caused." But the word respect was missing. Genuine remorse was missing. Acknowledgement of wrongdoing, yes. Shame or understanding, no. He touched the page lightly, as if it might crumble. Maybe because part of him felt fragile. Maybe because acceptance didn't erase the memory of betrayal. Despite the official victory, his high school still hadn't reinstated him fully. Some administrators quietly remained distant. The math team offered no word. Some classmates avoided him, circulation of the verdict aside, unwilling to engage. The letters and statements from Cambridge didn't travel well across continents. Many never saw them. Many never cared. For a community built around memory and identity, the absence of recognition felt like another kind of erasure. Legal vindication did not always equal social validation. That afternoon he walked by a city park and stopped at a bench, the framed retraction letter in his satchel. He sat down, sunlight filtering through overhanging branches, the noise of distant traffic humming softly. He closed his eyes, drawing in a long breath. For the first time since the trial began, he allowed himself to feel peace, just a little. The court had acknowledged his truth. The institution had bowed. That was real, unshakable. He opened his satchel again, pulled out a small notebook, the same one where he once scrawled solutions on borrowed paper in Baltimore. Now he scribbled a new idea, a foundation, a scholarship fund for underrepresented youth in STEM. He wrote slowly, deliberately, nothing fancy, just truth and possibility. A seed, a promise. Maybe together they could plant something that no institution could erase again. But even as the ink hit the page, a cold knot formed in his stomach. The kind you get when you know the fight isn't over, only changed shape. Because while the verdict offered justice on paper, not everyone would read it. Not everyone would believe it. Not everyone would care. And for everyone who saw the truth, there might be 10 who didn't. 10 who would see the apology, shrug and move on. 10 who would forget. That was the real risk now. Invisibility by neglect rather than denial. He closed the notebook and looked at the framed letter again. Outside the window, the city moved on. Cars passed. People walked. Lives went on. The sun shifted. Moments became memories. Everything kept moving, except some truths, some wounds, some names. He realized then what this verdict meant. It wasn't an end. It was a beginning. Tyrese stood up slowly, pocketing the letter, closing the satchel. He walked out of the park, the sunlight on his face uneven. Shadows longer than before. The world was listening now, but that didn't guarantee they would act. And deep down he sensed that's what made him uneasy. Because justice can be written. But healing is harder to script. But Tyrese walks out of the courtroom, not smiling. Something still feels wrong. Tyrese walked out of the courthouse surrounded by cameras, microphones, cheers and flashing lights. Yet none of it touched him. Noise swelled around him like a rising tide. Reporters shouting his name. Activists chanting slogans. Supporters reaching for his hands. But his mind drifted elsewhere. Everything outside was celebration, but everything inside felt strangely hollow. He had expected relief to wash over him, like warm water. expected the verdict to lift the weight from his chest, expected the apology to untie something tight in his spirit. But instead an uneasy stillness settled in him, an unspoken truth he couldn't yet name. Vindication had come, justice had come, but something else was missing. As he stepped into the car with his mother and attorney, leaving the courthouse behind, he stared out the window. People were still cheering. Some held signs with his name on them. Others flashed their phones to record him as he passed, yet none of it reached him. Inside the glass bubble of the car, he could hear only his own breath, uneven and shallow. His mother touched his arm gently. "You okay?" she asked. Her voice was soft, but loaded with the worry of someone who knew that winning could still feel like losing. He nodded, though he wasn't sure. "Yeah," he murmured. "I'm just tired." But tired was too small a word. Exhausted didn't capture it. Drained wasn't enough. What he felt was something deeper. Like something inside him had been hollowed out piece by piece through every denial, every argument, every document, every sleepless night, until only the shell victory remained. He had won the case, but he had lost pieces of himself along the way. When he returned home that evening, the house was filled with congratulations. Friends calling, neighbors dropping by, distant relatives sending messages saying how proud they were. Social media flooded with praise. Videos of his testimony were clipped, edited and shared millions of times. He had become a symbol, a headline, a case study, a victory narrative for justice. But somewhere between public applause and private silence, he struggled to recognize the boy he had been before all this. Quiet, brilliant, hidden in his notebooks, solving problems for the joy of discovery rather than for the scrutiny of the world. Late that night, after everyone had gone to sleep, Tyrese sat alone at the kitchen table. The framed Cambridge retraction letter and apologies sat in front of him. He ran his fingers along the edge of the glass. The words inside were clear, formal, and flat. For the public record, they mattered. For history, they were undeniable. But for him, they were not healing. Not enough. They couldn't return the year he lost. They couldn't erase the threats, the humiliation, the fear. They couldn't give him back his anonymity, the simple privilege of making a mistake without being a headline. They couldn't return the quiet joy he once felt in learning without being watched. He realized then that while he had won legally, personally he had changed in ways he didn't yet understand. And change did not mean restoration. Days passed. Interviews poured in. Universities reached out with offers. Tech companies contacted him with internships. Celebrities posted support. But every opportunity came with the same shadow. They wanted the symbol, not the student. They wanted the story, not the soul. Even the compliments felt heavy. "You're so brave. You changed history. You're an inspiration." He appreciated them, but each one reminded him of the price he had paid to earn words he never asked for. And so instead of accepting offers, he withdrew. He turned off notifications, stopped checking rankings, stopped reading articles. He focused instead on the idea he had been scribbling in his notebook long before the verdict. A foundation, a space for kids like him. Kids who loved numbers but didn't have the protection of elite legacy. Kids whose brilliance was overlooked or undervalued. Kids who were told implicitly or explicitly that greatness wasn't meant for them. He named it the Langston Initiative for Underrepresented Youth in STEM. The name felt too big for him, but he kept it anyway, not for ego, but for statement. He wanted the next black student who solved something spectacular to know that there was a place in the world that would see them fully, protect them fiercely, and celebrate them without fear of institutional backlash. With the settlement funds and donations from supporters, he rented a small community space, a bright, open room in a renovated warehouse downtown, with rows of whiteboards, shelves stocked with markers, bins of textbooks, laptops, old computers waiting to be rebuilt. The walls were painted in gentle colors, inviting rather than intimidating. On one side, he placed a mural with equations swirling around silhouettes of children reaching towards stars. At the center of the mural was a message he wrote himself: "Brilliance needs no permission." Over weeks, kids began to show up. Some shy, some eager, some skeptical. Tyrese welcomed every one of them with a quiet smile that finally felt real. He taught them algebra, geometry, coding, logic puzzles. He encouraged questions. He encouraged mistakes. He encouraged curiosity without fear. As he watched their eyes light up when they grasped a new idea, something inside him softened. Something inside him returned. One afternoon he arrived early to set up the classroom. He arranged notebooks on the tables, wiped down the whiteboards, and placed a few new books on the shelves. The sun streamed through tall windows, casting warm light across the room. It felt peaceful, different from the flashing lights of courtrooms and news cameras, different from the heavy silence of long nights reading legal documents. This peace felt earned, grounded, real. When the students arrived, they gathered around him eagerly. Today's lesson was on pattern recognition, a topic he had loved since childhood. He began explaining how patterns shape everything in mathematics, from number sequences to geometric symmetry. The children listened with wide eyes, some leaning forward, some scribbling in notebooks. Then, halfway through the lesson, a small voice from the back of the room cut through the quiet. A girl, maybe 12, with braids pulled into a loose ponytail and eyes bright with curiosity, raised her hand. Therese paused, marker still in his hand. "Yes?" he asked gently. She hesitated for a second, then smiled. A small, bold smile that carried more weight than she knew. "Want to try?" she asked. The room fell silent. The words echoed through him like electricity. Soft, innocent, yet charged with a history she didn't know she was touching. The phrase that once humiliated him now arrived from the mouth of a child he was teaching, reshaped not by arrogance but by eagerness. There was no mockery in her voice, no challenge meant to diminish, just curiosity, just possibility. His heart tightened, his breath caught. The past and present collided in a single moment he wasn't ready for. Every student in the room watched him, waiting. His hand trembled, not from fear but from the realization that this moment wasn't the echo of trauma. It was the beginning of something new, something he hadn't expected, something that felt like healing. As he teaches his first class, a young girl raises her hand and asks, "Wanna try?" They tried to erase his name, rewrite the truth, and bury his brilliance, just because of the color of his skin. But truth fought back, and this time, it won. If you believe no genius should be silenced, type yes. If this broke your heart, subscribe.